Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Gaurav Sharma and with me is Renu Kataria bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. President Ram Nath Kovind says connectivity with Central Asian countries remains key priority for India. India's exports crossed the $418 billion mark in 2021-22. Pakistan President dissolves the National Assembly on Prime Minister Imran Khan's advice. Country's Supreme Court to examine dismissal of the no trust vote. Sri Lanka government restricts access to major social media platforms to tackle growing unrest. China reports over 13,000 new COVID cases. Shanghai city put on complete lockdown. New COVID variant XE found in the UK may be more transmissible than any strain of COVID-19, warns WHO. India defeat Germany 2-1 to enter the quarterfinals of the Women's Junior Hockey World Cup. Australia win the ICC Women's ODI Cricket World Cup for a record 7th time. And in the India Premier League, the Punjab Kings set a victory target of 181 runs before the Chennai Super Kings in Mumbai. President Ram Nath Kovind has said that ensuring connectivity with the Central Asian countries remains a key priority for India. Mr. Kovind was addressing the young diplomats of Turkmenistan at the Institute of International Relations in Ashgabat on Sunday on the third day of his visit to the Central Asian country.
Connectivity with the Central Asian countries remains a key priority for India. India is a member of both the International North-South Transport Corridor and the Ashgabat Agreement. We have taken steps to operationalize the Chabahar port in Iran, which can provide a secure, viable and unhindered access to the sea for the Central Asian countries. While expanding connectivity, it is important to ensure that connectivity initiatives are consultative, transparent and participatory, with respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries. India stands ready to cooperate, invest and build connectivity in the region.
The President said that India's partnerships with the countries of the Global South have grown substantially while its relations with the major powers have deepened further. He said one of the key pillars of India's foreign policy in the recent years has been the Neighbourhood First policy.
One of the key pillars of India's foreign policy in recent years has been the Neighbourhood First policy. The overarching philosophy of India's engagement with its neighbors is to ensure that they also benefit from our economic development and growth. The focus of our Neighbourhood First policy is to enhance connectivity, augment trade and investment, and build a secure and stable neighbourhood.
President Kovind said that dynamism and vitality of the Indo-Pacific region makes it a global economic center, and India stands for an open, balanced, rules-based and stable international trade regime in the Indo-Pacific. He said that one of the focus areas of the Indian foreign policy in the last few years has been the revitalization of its historical ties with the Central Asian countries, which are a part of its extended neighborhood. He said, as developing countries, India and the Central Asian countries share common perspectives and similar approaches and face common challenges such as terrorism, extremism, radicalization and drug trafficking. The President also inaugurated an India Corner at the Institute of the International Relations on the occasion. The India Corner is envisioned to create interest in India among the students of the Institute in organizing India-related activities. The Government of India has provided computers, books on India, musical instruments and other materials to equip the India Corner. Earlier in the day, the President visited the People's Memorial Complex in Ashgabat and laid a wreath at the Monument of Eternal Glory. He also visited the Bakhtiar-Dik Sports Complex, where he offered floral tributes in front of the bust of Mahatma Gandhi and witnessed the yoga demonstration by the people of Turkmenistan under the supervision of an Indian instructor. On Monday morning, the President will leave for the Netherlands after concluding his visit to Turkmenistan.
Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal has said that India's goods exports have now crossed $418 billion mark. Addressing the media in New Delhi on India's historic export figures for the financial year 2021-22, Mr. Goyal said it is an important milestone in the journey towards an Atmanirbhar Bharat. He said every sector of the economy, be it micro, small and medium enterprises, farmer, entrepreneur and state governments, have all worked together to achieve this lucrative goal.
अभी डीजीएफटी ने बताया कि $418 बिलियन यानी 31-32 लाख करोड़ रुपए का निर्यात भारत ने पहली बार अपने इतिहास में किया है और जो टारगेट सेट किया था उससे भी लगभग 5% ज्यादा। मार्च महीने अकेले में $40 बिलियन एक्सीड किया, जो आज तक का इतिहास है। कभी $40 बिलियन एक्सपोर्ट किसी एक महीने में आज तक हमने नहीं किया। इस साल एक और बड़ी अच्छा संजोग रहा कि हर महीने 12 महीने तक $30 बिलियन से अधिक हर महीने निर्यात हुआ है।
Mr. Goyal said that India has truly gone from local to global in response to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's call. He expressed confidence that India's economy is poised to break a number of records. Mr. Goyal said government is now working on rolling out the District Export Hub initiative to strengthen the export infrastructure logistics at district level to facilitate exports. He said India's diversified export portfolio in 2021-22 show India's manufacturing abilities as well as growth in high-tech goods, electronics and agricultural products. The minister said the export of wheat in 2019-20, which was only 2 lakh tons, has increased to 21.55 lakh tons in 2020-21. Mr. Goyal said wheat export is likely to exceed 10 million tons in 2022-23. The minister said higher agricultural exports signify the ability of Indian farmers to meet the requirement of 1.35 billion population and yet produce a surplus to export to the rest of the world.
Pakistan President Arif Alvi has dissolved the National Assembly following Prime Minister Imran Khan's advice. We have a report.
Addressing the nation after the dismissal of no confidence motion in Parliament on Sunday, Imran Khan said he has also asked the President to call for fresh election.
एक डेमोक्रेटिक सोसाइटी में हम डेमोक्रेट्स अवाम के पास जाएं, अवाम से इलेक्शंस हो, अवाम फैसला करे कि वो किसको चाहती है। कोई बाहर से साजिश और इस तरह के लोग, करप्ट लोग की तकदीर का फैसला ना करें। और मैं अपनी कौम को आज कहता हूं कि आप इलेक्शंस की तैयारी करें और आपने फैसला करना है। किसी बाहर की कुव्वत, किसी करप्ट लोगों ने फैसला नहीं करना कि इस मुल्क का मुस्तकबिल क्या होगा। आपने फैसला करना है इस मुल्क।
He told the nation to prepare for elections. Minister of State for Information and Broadcasting Farooq Habib has said that fresh elections in the country will be held within 90 days. Earlier in the day, Deputy Speaker of National Assembly Qasim Khan Suri refused to hold a vote of no confidence motion against Prime Minister Khan. The Deputy Speaker dismissed the notorous move, terming it against Article 5 of the Constitution. Mr. Suri chaired today's session after opposition parties filed a no confidence motion against the Speaker Asad Kaisar. Speaking in the Assembly, Pakistan Information Minister Fawad Chaudhry told members that Pakistani officials had been told of an operation for a regime change by a foreign government. This, he said, went against the Constitution, and the Deputy Speaker chairing the session proceeded to declare the vote unconstitutional. Meanwhile, Pakistan Supreme Court on Sunday adjourned hearing on dissolution of National Assembly of Pakistan till April the 4th. The opposition has filed a petition in the Supreme Court, which is assessing whether the decision not to allow a vote of no confidence against the Prime Minister is valid. The Apex Court has formed a special bench to look into the dissolution of the Assembly. Meanwhile, heavy security has been deployed around government buildings and across the capital, Islamabad. Abhineet Shukla for World News, All India Radio.
In Sri Lanka, government has restricted access to major social media platforms, including Facebook and Twitter, to tackle growing unrest amid an unprecedented economic crisis. The restrictions come after the government on Saturday implemented a countrywide curfew as protest against the government's handling of the economic crisis turned violent. The Sri Lankan government said the decision was taken to stem misinformation. The curfew will run till 6 a.m. on Monday. The curfew and state of emergency in the near bankrupt country came as social media posts called for protest on Sunday. Sri Lanka is facing an acute lack of foreign currency to pay for even the most essential imports. Police said hundreds of people have defied the curfew and gathered at several suburban towns. The ongoing crisis has been compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has hit tourism and remittances. The government has said it is seeking a bailout from the International Monetary Fund and loans from India and China. India recently announced that it will extend $1 billion line of credit to Colombo as part of its financial assistance to the country to deal with the economic crisis. It follows a previous $500 million line of credit in February to help it purchase petroleum products. India also delivered a consignment of 40,000 metric tons of diesel to Sri Lanka on Saturday. This is the fourth such assistance from New Delhi to mitigate the spike in power cuts in the island nation.
Nepal Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Deuba offered prayers at the Kashi Vishwanath Temple at Varanasi in Uttar Pradesh on Sunday. Mr. Deuba was accompanied by his wife, Dr. Arzu Deuba, and a high-level delegation. Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath was also present at the temple. Mr. Deuba also visited the Kal Bhairav Temple and the historical Sri Pashupatinath Nepalese Temple at Lalita Ghat. He was briefed about the renovation works going on in the ancient holy city of Kashi. Mr. Deuba also held a meeting with the Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister in the afternoon and interacted with a group of Nepalese people living in Varanasi. Earlier, the Nepalese Prime Minister and his wife were given a warm welcome at the Varanasi airport. Mr. Deuba was on a 3-day visit to India. On Saturday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Nepalese counterpart held delegation-level talks in New Delhi. During the talks, the two leaders reviewed the progress in the India-Nepal partnership and discussed ways to further their cooperation agenda. Both the Prime Ministers jointly launched the 35-kilometer-long cross-border passenger train services between Jayanagar of Bihar and Kurtha in Nepal and the Solu Corridor 132 kV power transmission line and substation in Nepal built under the Government of India's line of credit. They also launched the RuPay card in Nepal. Following the talks, 4 MOUs were signed in the presence of both the Prime Ministers.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on Indo-Nepal relations over the year. In conversation are Atul Aneja, International Affairs expert, and Manas Pratim Bhuyan, journalist.
Mr. Aneja, the Nepalese Prime Minister began a 3-day visit to India in his first bilateral visit after taking charge as Prime Minister of Nepal in July for a 5th stint. And yesterday, he held extensive talks with our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, reviewing the full spectrum of the bilateral agenda covering political, economic, trade, energy security, and development issues. A major focus of the talk was to boost connectivity as the two sides unveiled the first cross-border railway connection, and another area of focus was power sector. Both sides released a vision document to further expand cooperation in the power sector. So how do you see the overall outcome of the talks between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Nepalese Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Deuba today?
I think this is a moment when the India-Nepal relationship is being rebooted to a new level. As you are aware, there were problems and hiccups in our relationship for the last few years. But finally, I think what has happened is that both sides have realized, especially Nepalese side has now understood the importance of the special relationship between India and Nepal. And therefore, each side is now willing to restart the relationship with a big bang. And I think coming of Prime Minister Deuba, a veteran politician who has been to India several times, and the fact that this is his first visit itself shows that the Nepalese side is going ahead with reviving its relationship with full vigor and with full energy. And you also see, Manas, what you said, the spectrum of topics which were discussed covers such a wide range. And it means that we are looking at reviving the relationship in a comprehensive manner without leaving any side of whether it's economic, whether it's energy, whether it's trade, whether it's culture. So I think it's a 360-degree attempt to take India-Nepal relations to a new height.
It's a very promising restart, and since new agreements are signed, new foundations are being laid to keep it at that level and also modernize the relationship, which we can talk when we discuss connectivity or digital payments, some specific interesting aspects which came up in the talks today.
Yeah, you briefly mentioned about hiccups in ties actually. I mean, there was some kind of turbulence because of the boundary road that erupted in 2020. The ties came under severe strain after Nepal published a new political map in 2020 that showed 3 Indian territories as part of Nepal. And following the row, India also reacted very sharply, calling it a unilateral act and cautioned Kathmandu that such artificial endorsement of territorial claims will not be acceptable to India. So since then, we have seen several visits. At the end of 2020, our Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla visited Nepal. That visit was followed by then Nepalese Foreign Minister's visit to India. And both sides have been resolving to address this boundary issue through talks. And in today's dialogue, Nepalese Prime Minister Deuba actually asked Prime Minister Modi to establish a bilateral mechanism to resolve the boundary issue amicably. And at a media briefing, we heard Foreign Secretary Shringla saying that the general understanding between the two sides was to address the issue in a responsible manner and in the spirit of close bilateral neighborly ties between the two countries. And at the same time, he emphasized that the politicization of the boundary issue should be avoided. So how do you see this new resolve the boundary issue in an amicable manner in an environment of friendly relations and dialogue? And in the press conference, Shringla also cited India's talks with Bangladesh in successfully resolving the maritime and land border disputes. We successfully resolved the disputes with Bangladesh, and that was cited as a model by the Foreign Secretary for resolution of the boundary issue with Nepal. So how do you see this approach of Nepal and India to address the boundary question in an atmosphere of close neighborly relations?
Manus, let's put things in context. When the relationship between India and Nepal nosedived, it was for several reasons. And there was one important factor, which was the China factor, which got because we had the problem with in 2015 with the Nepalese. Unfortunately, I think the Nepalese then communist government was whiffed with India and went straight to China, even when it came to energy supplies. The Chinese, of course, came in and saw the strategic location of Nepal and promised them integration with their Belt and Road Initiative. Some ports were identified in China, so very far away from the Nepalese border, and were frankly unviable. But they went ahead and signed that. But I think over time, what the Nepalese realized was that it is best to balance the relationship between these two heavyweights. And especially at a time when India-China relations were going south, Nepal realized that it would not like to get crossfire into these big powers. I think that was the context and also the complexion of the particular government in Nepal, which triggered this sort of a friction between India and Nepal. But there has been a 360-degree change in that. We have a new government coming in Nepal, and which is far more, has very deep roots in India and the Indian political system. So that balance has now been restored. And that is what we see reflected in the revisiting of this border problem, which former Prime Minister Oli had raised in Parliament, which had passed that. So that phase is over. So there is a new will to resolve the thorny issues, and border being one of them. Now, I think we've taken a step forward. Not only are we willing to resolve, but we actually have a role model for that. And that's where Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan comes out with this Bangladesh example, that here is a concrete example of two South Asian neighbors, which again have had a patchy relationship, not always smooth, despite the fact that India played a seminal role in Bangladesh's independence from Pakistan. But nevertheless, there is a model of how that particular, both on the maritime plane and on the land border plane, there is an example of how these two countries managed to resolve. So that is the precedent which is being shown to Nepal. If India and Bangladesh can do so, there is no reason in the similar spirit of goodwill and give and take that India and Nepal can't do it. I think they've moved really forward on modalities, or in the same sense, the model to pursue the resolution of the boundary issue. And on top of that is the sea change in political thinking. That look, you're not looking at the negatives now, you're on a positive track. That is both India and Nepal. So you're looking at commonality, and therefore there is a political will to go ahead and encash or to implement the template which was identified and shown by the foreign sector. So I think now things can move pretty rapidly on the India-Nepal front coming from this visit. And there were so many other things, for example, digital payments. The RuPay will now be valid in Nepal for consumers, which essentially means that on digital payments, again, there is a road to integration between India and Nepal. And that's very, very important. It can spur a lot of activity. Payments once they're smooth, tourism, investments, everything can be moved forward by something like that. Then I think Manas, one very important aspect is the civilizational connectivity, which is unique. Nepal and China, for example, don't share that kind. The Ramayan route, which the Prime Minister talked about, the railway connectivity from sites which are rooted in our civilizational history. I think that gives India and Nepal a very, very special dimension, which goes way beyond the economic and geopolitical issues which we have been discussing, right? So the relationship has actually tapped into its roots right now with this visit. And nourished by that, then we go on and identify specific projects based on that affinity, a sense of identity, and a sense of bonding. So there are way too many dimensions which, as I was reading before the program, which are sort of getting unveiled and surfacing now between India and Nepal. And that's a great sign. If we continue this momentum, then this will take off. We have other projects like BBN, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal. You see now, for example, Nepal is a landlocked country. Now the Chinese are offering them ports which are unviable. I mean, it is in Gansu province in Xinjiang or in that direction. So instead of that, if the Nepalese can use not just our ports, which is Kolkata and others on the east coast, but if they can access Bangladeshi ports like Chittagong or Cox's Bazar or the new ones like Matilbari, the deep water port which is coming up with there. So I think that will ease a lot of pressure and provide a channel for trade from Nepal under a bigger scheme where not only it's bilateral between India and Nepal, but also includes Bhutan, Bangladesh, and then who knows, this is part of the old Asian, not the old, but the Asian highway which is being built. And that brings Nepal in connectivity way forward towards Thailand and Southeast Asia. Nepal gets integrated into India's Act East policy framework and takes it connectivity leads finally to Da Nang in Vietnam. So there is much more to this visit than bilateral. Connectivity and the roadmap for connectivity looks far, and it's something which is completely unprecedented. So I just hope that we move step by step and move in this bigger direction where Nepal is integrated much more strongly in the global economy and politics.
Thank you, Mr. Aneja, for your detailed overview about India-Nepal relations and the outcome of talks between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Nepalese counterpart, Sher Bahadur Deoba. Thank you so very much.
You're very welcome, Manas.
This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on our Twitter handle at AIR News Alerts.
China on Sunday reported more than 13,000 new COVID cases, the highest since the peak of the first wave more than 2 years ago. Entire Shanghai city, which is China's most populous city and main financial hub with more than 25 million residents, has been put on complete lockdown. Shanghai's restrictions threaten to stall public supply chains, with shipping and trucking services hit further due to the lockdown. State media quoting experts said Shanghai epidemic scale is bigger than the previous Wuhan outbreak, but its severity is low in comparison. Meanwhile, a new COVID variant has been found in UK, the World Health Organization said in its latest report. The mutant called XE may be more transmissible than any strain of COVID-19, the health body said.
In the Indian Premier League, chasing a victory target of 181 runs set by the Punjab Kings, the Chennai Super Kings were 98 for 7 in 15 overs at the Brabourne Stadium in Mumbai when reports last came in. Riding on the 60-run knock of Liam Livingstone, the Punjab Kings scored 180 runs for 8 wickets in the stipulated 20 overs. Earlier, the Chennai Super Kings captain Ravindra Jadeja won the toss and opted to bowl.
In hockey, the Indian women's team stunned formidable Germany 2-1 to register its second consecutive win in the pool stages and assured its place in the quarterfinals of the FIH Junior World Cup on Sunday. India, who thrashed Wales 5-1 in its opening Pool D match on Saturday, scored through 2 penalty corner conversions by Lal Ramsiani in 2nd minute and Mumtaz Khan in 25th minute to emerge winners. Germany's lone goal was scored by Jules Bleuel in the 57th minute. The Indians will finish off their pool engagements against Malaysia on 5th of April before the quarter-final round, which starts on 8th of this month. The Indians are currently atop Pool D with 2 wins from as many games ahead of second-placed Germany. 2 teams each from the pools will qualify for the knockout rounds.
Australia have won the ICC Women's ODI Cricket World Cup for a record 7th time after defeating England by 71 runs in the finals at the Hagley Oval in Christchurch. Chasing the target of 357 set by Australia, England women were all out for 285 in 43.4 overs. Earlier put into bat first, Australia posted 356 for 5 in 50 overs. For England, even an unbeaten 148 by vice-captain Natalie Siver could not save the defeat to Australia. Jess Jonathan and Alana King took 3 wickets each for Australia. Alisa Healy was declared the player of the match and also the player of the tournament. And now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. Let us take a look at the press reports on China. AFP reports that China on Sunday reported more than 13,000 COVID cases, the highest since the peak of the first wave more than 2 years ago.
Global Times reports Chinese Vice Premier Sun Chunlan urged Shanghai to make resolute and swift moves to curb the latest flare-up of COVID-19 pandemic and stick to dynamic zero-COVID policy.
Daily Mail writes that China has been accused of launching a flurry of cyber attacks on Ukraine's military and nuclear infrastructure days before Russia's military attack, indicating initial support for war.
And now let's have a look at what made headlines in Nepal. The Kathmandu Post reports that India and Nepal signed 4 agreements.
The Mint reports that the launch of RuPay in Nepal is a significant move to enhance financial linkages between the two countries, India's Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla said on Saturday.
The Annapurna Express quotes Prime Minister Narendra Modi as saying that India-Nepal relation is developing as a unique example in the world.
Now let us have a look at what made headlines in Bangladesh. Remittance to Bangladesh rose to an 8-month high in March as migrant workers sent higher amounts to their families for the month of Ramzan, reports Daily Star.
Awami League parliamentarian Suborna Mustafa asked in Bangladesh Parliament on Sunday if there is a law that prohibits women from wearing bindi on their forehead, reports Protham Alo.
Let us have some brief news from Afghanistan now. And Pajwok reports that the UNHRC has appointed Richard Bennett as a special rapporteur on the human rights situation in Afghanistan.
ANI News reports that President Ramnath Kovind during his visit to Turkmenistan says India-Turkmenistan share broad consensus on situation prevailing in Afghanistan.
And Afghanistan Times reports that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that he deeply regrets the closing of schools for girls in grades 7 to 12 in Afghanistan. Before we end, a quick look at the headlines once again. President Ramnath Kovind says connectivity with Central Asian countries remains key priority for India. India's exports crossed the $418 billion mark in 2021-22. Pakistan President dissolves the National Assembly on Prime Minister Imran Khan's advice, country's Supreme Court to examine dismissal of the no trust vote. Sri Lanka government restricts access to major social media platforms to tackle growth unrest. China reports over 13,000 new COVID cases. Shanghai city put on complete lockdown. New COVID variant XE found in the UK may be more transmissible than any strain of COVID-19, warns WHO. India defeat Germany 2-1 to enter the quarterfinals of the Women's Junior Hockey World Cup. Australia win the ICC Women's ODI Cricket World Cup for a record 7th time. And in the Indian Premier League, the Punjab Kings set a victory target of 181 runs before the Chennai Super Kings in Mumbai.
And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artist from Sri Lanka.
Vaishnav Jan to tene kahi rete veer parani जाने रे पर दुखे उपकार करे तो ये मन अभिमान नाले रे वैष्णव जन तो।
And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.